Hello everyone, I'm Keshav and I just finished my first year of MBA at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experiences going through the MBA application process and a little bit about my time or first year at Ross. So, quick introduction, I am a mechanical engineer. I did my engineering from University of Toronto, Canada. I focused on sustainable energy and mechatronics and was really interested in being in the energy space. So when I graduated, I started working in the nuclear industry. I started off as a system engineer in a nuclear plant near Toronto, and then moved to design engineering and was a design engineer in the same plant. In total, I had about 4 years of work before joining Ross. In addition to my daily work, I worked on a lot of startups slash side projects that I worked on during weekends and evenings, essentially. So I have a few questions that I'll just walk through as a guide for this video. The first one is, how did I prepare for my MBA applications last year? So personally for me, the biggest thing in the MBA application process was being sure that I wanted to pursue an MBA. It's a big decision. It's a big decision for everyone, and even for me, taking a couple of years off of my career, foregoing that salary, moving to a new city, a lot of big changes, and I felt that if I hadn't convinced myself, I could not work on the other application elements as sincerely as I otherwise would. Once I had convinced myself, and I wouldn't go into the details on how I did that because everyone is in a unique situation. Once I did convince myself, I essentially looked at the entire MBA application and looked at what were the different inputs and the associated timelines. Looking back now, I would just categorize the entire MBA application into three main things. The first one being the examination, so the GMAT or the GRE scores that unfortunately everyone has to go through. The second one would be the direct application requirements. These are the things that an applicant needs to have in order to have a complete application. So this would include your essays, professional recommendations, the additional details about yourself. These are fairly standard across almost all schools. And the third thing that I feel is also very important is outreach. So this is prospective students reaching out to schools to just find out more about the school, learning more about what the school is really all about, what is the culture of the school. And this is a tough one. We'll get into it a little later in the video. So just quickly walking through each of these three categories. The first one, GMAT. So what I did for GMAT, I self-studied for it. I used books, and I'm trying to recall the books that I used most extensively were the Manhattan GMAT books, and then I used online resources. The GMAT Club was something that I used a lot as well. In essence, what I did was I did a baseline examination to see where I really stood and how far away was I from a score that I really wanted. The baseline test and then a few other tests helped me identify really what my weak areas were in GMAT. And I feel when I was targeting like certain scores, it would always be the weak areas that would pull me down. So I decided I'll focus a lot and hone my skills in the weakest areas, essentially. I specifically remember there's this thread on GMAT Club which goes by, I think, the hardest GMAT questions across the entire website. So I looked at that thread and then did a lot of practice on the areas that I was weak in, and that helped me a lot. So that's how I prepared for my GMAT, essentially. The second thing, which is the direct application requirements, the essays. For me, what I realized was the more honest I was, the better was the quality of the essays. So the message that I really wanted to deliver through these essays was essentially what my past achievements were, where my future aspirational goals are, and how is the school going to help me tie the two? Like, how is the school going to help me get to where my aspirational goals are, and is there any relation to my past experiences, essentially? So again, being as honest as possible to yourself helps bring out your true nature in those essays. It's tough because you're trying to get that message across in, I don't know, 150 words. So you really have to be very careful and be selective on what you write. Personally, I really wanted my true stuff to come out. I did not use any professional help in these essays, but what I did was once I would write my essay, I would run it by with someone who is close to me, so family or friends who know me very well, and I would just make them read this essay and ask them, don't judge the what the essay is saying, just tell me, is this essay really representing me? You know me, is this an accurate representation of me? And a lot of times we have certain ideas about ourselves, so it's just good to get a sanity check from someone who knows you very well. And it helps a lot, and that worked very well for me. The third thing was the outreach. So this is, prospective students reaching out to schools. This is an area where I feel I could have done a lot better, just looking back. But what this essentially I feel is it's tough to identify what each school stands for. There are 20 business schools out there that you're probably looking at. How do you distinguish one from the other? And I feel the only way you do it is talking to people who have been with this in that school, who have spent significant time in that school. So it could be the admissions team, so attending events that this admission team hosts in your city. It could be talking to the current students, the alumni, just people who spend time at that school. Talk to them, and that helped me learn more about what each school stood for. I'll get into this a little more after as well, but these were the three areas that how I broke the entire application down into. The next question I have is, why did I choose Ross? I love Ross, by the way, and looking back, I would again boil this down into three main reasons. First and foremost being the career options. Now, I feel majority of the people, including myself, do an MBA to have to pursue certain careers they wanted to. It could be in your current career, or it could be a career switch as well. So I realized what were the careers that I wanted to pursue, and I looked at schools that had strong connections to each of these careers. So, for example, I wanted career X and Y. I would look at different schools' career report and see how many students are actually going into those careers. And what I really liked about Ross was Ross is fairly rounded in terms of across the board. Ross sends students to different industries. So whether it's tech, strategy, marketing, general management, finance, Ross is fairly well-rounded, and I like that. So not only was Ross sending significant proportion of people into my desired industry, but the fact that it was such a well-rounded program really impressed me. The second thing that actually won me over was the culture of the school. And this is something really hard to even explain. Like, what is a school's culture? When you think of Michigan, I think of Michigan football. Is football the Michigan culture? So it was tough for me what that culture meant. And this goes back to this outreach aspect that I mentioned for the MBA applications. The way I defined culture was, okay, I'm going to talk to as many people from that school as possible. So, I mean, as many as an extent, but I spoke to about 5 or 6 people. And I also visited the school. So I was lucky that Michigan Ross was about a 5-hour drive from where I lived. So I crossed the border, went to the campus, visited the school. And Ross has this huge common area called the Winter Garden. It's like a large open space with tables and chairs, and students mostly sitting over there. So I just tried to picture myself in that Winter Garden, with my head down, and tried to imagine the people who had phone conversations with, the 5 or 6 people. If I was surrounded by those 5 or 6 people and then scale that up to, say, by a factor of 10, so scale those 5 people to 50, would I enjoy being there? Are these the people who I want to be with? And the answer was yes. I had a very positive experience talking to these 5 or 6 people. I could definitely see the Ross, at least the sample I spoke to was accomplished yet humble, very supportive, very collaborative, going above and beyond to help me during my application process. So I would definitely, if I was sitting on a table in Wintergarten and I had these 5 or 6 people around me, I would put my head up and say hi and want to talk to these people. That's how I define the culture of the school. Uh, I would do that for different schools as well. So any other school I would visit, I would picture myself being in the large common area of that school, surrounded by the people I'd spoken to. Would I want to spend 2 years of my life in that common area? And whenever the answer was yes, I would say, yeah, I would go to that school. The third and final thing that really helped me make my decision for Ross was, and this is something really personal, as I mentioned, I went for my undergrad at University of Toronto. That's a school located in downtown Toronto, in the middle of this huge city. Students come from far away, they commute. It's a very commuter school. So I did not want a similar experience again. I wanted to experience something very different. So something like a college town. And Ann Arbor is amazing for that. Definitely did not see myself being in, say, New York, Boston, or LA, because I know I'll be spending my perhaps post-MBA career in these big cities. So these are 2 years that I wanted to have a different experience for. And Michigan Ross fit the bill across all my requirements. And those were the 3 main drivers on why I chose Michigan Ross. All right, the next thing I have is, how did I navigate the recruiting process? So this was kind of a cultural shock for me, coming from engineering and a very technical background. I remember when I was doing my undergrad in engineering, recruiting was never like a top priority thought, because the way engineering is, you focus on your engineering systems, you work on the right clubs, and then employers post their applications, you submit the resume. If you have the right club / grade / you tend to get the interviews, and depending on how good of an engineer you are in that interview, you tend to get the job. So recruiting was never on my priority list during my undergrad. But when I came to business school, Michigan Ross specifically, I was surprised how much of a focus recruiting was. Even the summer before classes started, the school had encouraged us to start thinking about careers that we wanted to take, in spite of whatever I had written in my application essays. So Ross has this cool thing. They send out an open-ended survey with about 100 questions. It's fairly long, and these are like vague questions that you submit your answers to, and depending on what your answers are, the survey spits out a few, or like the most appropriate careers for you. And I was fortunate, the 2 careers that I wanted to pursue were in line with what the survey told me, whatever the AI program told me. So that was good. So it's great information to have going in. And the second thing I think Ross made us do was have a one-on-one appointment with a career coach right before, then the summer before. This was helpful because, having done that, I had a good picture of what input I had gotten from the career coach. But more importantly, I knew exactly how to log on to the computer system and book an appointment. Because a lot of times you're just spinning your wheels trying to understand the system. But I knew that before I was on campus. So that was very helpful. Once I did come on campus, Ross, depending on what career someone wants to pursue, puts you into this thing called a FACT group, FACT, F-A-C-T. These are functional accountability career teams. What these groups are essentially 5 to 6 MBA ones, first year MBAs, that are led by one MBA 2, so a second year MBA who has had success in the career that you want to pursue. These groups were amazing because as we would have meetings starting from the second week on campus to almost to the point where people had interviews or got an offer, essentially. And these meetings were periodic. They would occur every week with a very pointed agenda / schedule. Things to do during that meeting. So it forced people to stay up to speed. And starting from just your resume to your 2-minute pitch to interview prep, everything was done in a structured way, in a very linear fashion. So taking you from almost scratch to the point where you're giving interviews. Those fact groups were extremely helpful. Third thing that I found helpful was the MBA tools. These are your second year MBAs who've who are much wiser, been there, done that, and have the wisdom to share, and they're very accessible. So just spending time with the second year MBAs, again, going to the winter garden, striking a conversation and asking them things you're going through and if they went through the same thing or not. That was very helpful. And finally, the last thing is the career coaches, the official Ross career team. I would first go through my fact group learnings, my peer coach, my MBA 2 inputs, and then have a final meeting with my Ross career coaches. Just get their input on where I was and whether I was on the right track, going forward, essentially. Another thing that I forgot to mention was these student clubs. So, consulting club or the energy club, tech club, these clubs have meetings again on a periodic basis, mostly weekly, that reinforce the learnings that you get in a fact group. So if the fact group talked about, for example, resume one week, the consulting club and the tech club would just reinforce the learnings on resumes. You spend a lot of time recruiting. Eventually, if you work through this entire process, that helps a lot in the recruiting process. That's how I navigated my recruiting, essentially. Just FYI, recruiting is very unique, again, across different industries. So recruiting for investment banking, for example, would be very different from recruiting for tech. Tech recruiting would happen further down the pipeline, whereas investment banking would happen, I think, the first thing that happens in the pipeline. So the experiences change depending on where you want to go, but in general, that's how I've navigated my processes. A typical day at Ross. This is, again, changes so much that it's hard to describe what a typical day would be. It changes a lot, specifically in terms of where you are in your MBA timeline, the first year at least. So, for example, Ross has 4 quarters: Fall A, Fall B, Winter A, Winter B. My typical day during Fall A would be very different from a typical day during Winter A. Fall A has a lot of core courses and recruiting is just starting, so it's not that demanding. Winter A, core courses go down, your recruiting goes up, so it swings a lot. Nonetheless, I decided to take a screenshot of my calendar 2 days from Fall A. So this is the quarter you would go into just after starting business school. So I'll share this screenshot here. Let's quickly walk through it. So this is a typical Sunday and Monday during Fall A. So as you can see, just the day before there was an assignment due for TO 502. So this was probably an assignment that was due midnight on Saturday. Then on Sunday, you wake up and you start your day at 11 a.m., which is the tech club. So, Sunday, a lot of clubs have their meetings, and these are the meetings where I mentioned they help you with the recruiting. So tech club had a meeting at 11 a.m. Then I had an assignment due at 12, so probably came out of the meeting, just provided some finishing touches on some assignment, submitted that. Then went to a consulting club meeting, another 1-hour meeting from 1 to 2. Have some space in between. There's an energy club meeting in the evening, and then finally, I guess we found time for some stat assignment that we had to do. Again, that's a team meeting, but this is not a club, but rather the course for statistics, and I'm just meeting my team starting at 8 p.m., however long it takes after that. Coming to Monday, I have a quiz due at 8 a.m. This is economics, so hopefully I submitted that on time. Then have space before my accounting class. Try to hit the gym. I don't know if I actually went or not. The classes are typically 2 hour long, so with a 10-minute break in between. So accounting class ended at 12:40, and then I have a statistics class that ends at 4:30, And in the evening, then there's a bunch of club related stuff again happening. So there's the entrepreneurship and venture club interviews that I was doing, and had an automotive club meeting. And finally, there's a recruiting session by Fiat Chrysler. So one thing that's missing over here is, of course, in addition to your academics and clubs, you also have spent time with your classmates / session mates. So that happens as well. So this is typically how a day looks like. At Ross, you do, in general, 4 courses every quarter. Every day has at least 2 courses, classes for 2 courses. Alright, did not walk through that very structurally, but get the idea. Finally, what advice would I give to someone who was in my shoes last year? Well, kind of alluded to this before. The entire MBA application process, it can be a lot of fun, especially if you don't do it in isolation. I know initially when I started off, I started doing it just by myself. I would lock myself in a room, look at the website, what the admission requirements were, start planning that out, just sitting in that room. But I think definitely if I could go back 1 year, I would start the process early so that I could get out of this isolation mode and start talking to people. And when I say people, I mean people, the students, the alumni, admissions team, my other people who are applying for MBAs. Just get as much information as possible. This would help you get a lot of data points in terms of what the school is. That will help you to decide what schools to target, what rounds to target. Also will help you what career options to target. And all of this information will help you make a very informed decision and help you write informed essays. And that really does shine out versus if you haven't done that. So if I could go back 1 year, I would start the process really early and then, pick up the phone and start making those phone calls to get 15 minutes of time from people, start talking about their experiences going through an MBA, and just get a good picture of what the whole school stands for essentially, and where it can take you. That's all I have. I hope this was useful. I wish you all the best in your MBA journey. Take care.